we have seen today that deep learning methods have contributed to the development of SDMs, and they offer new potentialities that are quite exciting, but they also come with some challenges and limits. And regarding, for instance, the topics of interpretability, uncertainty quantification, or transferability of the predictions, now we propose to discuss to what extent these deep SDM potentialities, they align with expectations and needs from the fields of ecological research, biodiversity conservation, and land use planning. And we have the chance today to be able to discuss that with experts from various fields. Also, we should consider how accessible are deep SDMs for final uses. So, in terms of costs that they represent for investing in specific technical skills, costs in terms of computational needs and computational energetical consumption as well. Is it worth investing in this technology given a specific research context or end-use context? So we have today various fields represented through our participants. So we tried to create a gradient from end users of SDMs to method developers, and we'll structure the discussion in this way. So I'll let you guys introduce yourself, but first we'll have two short talks from Laura, Manocci, and Clovis that will introduce a few use cases of their own that should kickstart our discussion. So Laura, if you want to begin.
Okay. Hello everybody. I'm Laura. I'm a researcher at IRD in the Marbec laboratory. I'm a marine ecologist, and together we'll dive into the oceans. I will bring here one case study. My case study is marine megafauna in coral reef ecosystems. So marine megafauna includes marine mammals, sea turtles, sharks, and rays. They are all long-lived species with a late maturity. They are very vulnerable to marine activities, like fisheries or coastal constructions, and many of these populations have declined. Through my studies, I've been working in different areas of coral reefs, including New Caledonia, Indonesia, and more recently, Mayotte. To study these species, I use image-based surveys from airplanes with camera fitted underneath or aerial drones, and in order to count this population, I automate image analysis with deep learning algorithms, mainly to detect and identify the species. After that, I use SDMs. They are central to my work. These SDMs, they use as input the counts derived from deep learning models. And as outputs, I want to make maps to inform managers about the abundance of species. Here is a case study of dugong. Dugong is a marine mammal, a seagrass specialist, a very endangered species. And here is a very simple GAM modeling abundance as a response, and with different predictors. Here, distance to the barrier path, seagrass coverage, and depth. In that case, the model was simple because the sample size was limited. This is a rare species, a cryptic one. It's very hard to detect. And so with this model, we were able to explain about 40% of the variance and make this map interpolating dugong abundance within the surveyed area. And lastly is an example of conservation application where we use the predicted abundance map in spatial prioritization algorithm in order to derive some scenarios of marine protected areas targeting different percentages of abundance. And that's basically it for this case study. I leave the round to Clovis. Ouais.
Ta présentation, je crois.
Là, non.
Elle est déjà ouverte
Oui.
Et je ne sais plus comment il a fait tout à l'heure. To make the full screen. Control L.
Hi everyone, I'm Clovis.
I work for Nitidae, which is a French NGO, working mostly on conservation of natural resources and rural development in mostly in African countries. And it's okay? Right. So, particularly, more on remote sensing applied for special land use planning. And we develop research on applied ecology laboratory within this NGO. So I will show you some of the three case study we went the last years using SDM. So one tackling biodiversity change in Madagascar. Another case study more on a regional scale, targeting and trying to improve protected area management, and the last one on crop suitability mapping. So that was a research project. We worked with CIRAD and other partners, including Madagascar protected area authorities and other NGOs, using SDM and a large biodiversity, fauna and flora observation at national scale, and developing some maps in order to assess impact of climate change and deforestation in Madagascar. So some key results we produced, it was to not only map the richness or diversity at a community level, but also the impact of climate change, basically changing climate features and variables to assess potential gain and loss, and see whether the protected area network is matching those threats. Another case study, it's very much applied, success of Madagascar. So Nitidae is involved as a manager of this protected area between two other protected areas on the tropical moist forest corridor. And SDM using some key animals, key flagship species were used to understand as well the impact of climate change. At first, idea was to see whether the boundaries of the protected area was matching those threats, whether we need to focus our effort on biodiversity monitoring on the field. So this helps, shows that the importance of conservation in this area. One of the impact, because I think the question here is that not especially the maps were used, but it was more useful on the policy level to raise awareness on this area and to move from a non-protected area towards a protected area. So it's at a very upper policy level. It's those type of maps and results helped to move forward large conservation programs. And lastly, this is more like Nitidae is working on agricultural development. So it's not only biodiversity, but we have also interest in some cash crop plants or trees. In this example, we're working a lot on cashew trees. We have example in Tanzania, in Mozambique, for avocado in this map, and that's help also for private sector, but also national authority to help to decide whether to invest in on most suitable areas. And that's mostly 3 case studies as an overview, and I think this is the question we're gonna discuss about data rarity, the difficulty also to transform those maps derived from SDM to some decision-making process is not easy. And I was very interested in those deep SDM state-of-the-art method to see how to handle those the high-resolution biodiversity map with low data context. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Clovis. And Laura for this very nice example. Now we can give the microphone to people that have not had the opportunity to introduce themselves. So David and Olivier.
So me first. So I work like Laura in a Marbec laboratory, so mainly on marine systems and vertebrates like fish or mammals. So we work mainly on MPA, so marine protected area effect, under the context of climate change and anthropogenic pressure like fisheries.
And I'm Olivier Gimenez. I'm working at the Center for Functional Ecology, Functional and Evolutionary Ecology at Montpellier. And I have a background in statistics, and I've been using SDMs for some time now. And I'm using deep learning mainly for computer vision, so to classify species on images from cam traps, for example. And also to identify individuals by patterns on their coat, for example. I'm working on animals mainly, and that's all.
Thanks, Olivier. So now we can switch to the first part of the discussion, where we will cover kind of the vision of deep SDMs, their opportunities and limits from the perspective of, let's say, end users. So I will more address the question toward the other corner of the table, but of course, anyone feel free to react. So the first question is how central are SDMs in general in your research or in the decision-making workflows you work with in terms of conservation or land use planning? And what do you think deep SDM could bring as an added value? So in terms of centrality of SDMs, do you work only with SDMs as an analysis object, or also with diversity metrics, connectivity metrics, or other types of ecological analysis? So,
yes, in our case, we know that underwater visual census is very hard, so it's hard to detect many species in the sea. So we use mainly deep SDM to infer presence or abundance of species that are still very hard to detect or quantify. So deep SDM are very good at predicting species where we have very few observations. This is for me, the main application. And for IUCN classifications, for instance, we have many data deficient species, and it's very interesting to get more information from SDM, deep SDM, to fill some information for the species which are not yet classified on the threatened status.
Okay, so in your case, deep SDMs are already used in kind of a decision workflow for biodiversity conservation, if I understand correctly.
I would say that marine science is a bit lagging behind terrestrial science. We have less applications, but given the emergence of environmental DNA, all these tools, we get more and more sequences and taxa which are detected. So we are more able to feed deep SDM with more information from satellite imageries, but as well from field surveys.
Thanks for, feel free to react, Laura.
For me, I have a total newbie to deep SDMs, but I have used SDMs. SDMs are important in my workflow. They are actually the third step. First step is data collection. Second step is image analysis with deep learning. Third step is SDM. And last step is the spatial prioritization. And so for SDMs, haven't had a chance to apply the deep SDMs yet, but I do apply the deep learning techniques for image analysis. And perhaps I see now we are two different communities, either applying deep learning for image analysis, either applying deep SDMs. So it will be nice to bridge the two communities at some point. Yep. And an important, as David was talking about, we work with rare species in undersampled areas. So for me, a good promise of deep SDMs is to be able to deal with the rarity, but I have yet to learn about the whole process, and I'm a bit drawn into a lot of information today.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It appeared in several presentations today. Maybe deep learning experts can develop on that a bit later.
Yep.
But meanwhile, if Clovis and Olivier, you have other reactions.
So regarding the use of SDM and the trend, I would say a short answer would be we're using it more and more, even though it's an NGO and doing research. We have ongoing project in Cameroon, for instance, and trying to, with limited data, so we have this added value of SDM to generalize on the world territory, for sure, but also to think what's drive the research there is to find out some index, biodiversity index, could be richness or specific index on the global, let's say, biodiversity policy, in particular the biodiversity offset, which is exists in France also, but find out methods, standards to implement projects to protect in some place and to quantify the loss. So we have to not only depends on the forest map, which is the actual case of quantifying biodiversity, but moving towards fauna and flora maps and data. So I think this is something that's growing demand on method and on outputs on SDM. And also trend, that's the last point I didn't develop, but I really, with the same, we're not really using deep SDM so far. So we have SDM, traditional SDM as a toolbox, but not state-of-the-art tools. And I'm particularly interested because so far we're using, let's say, bioclim data to map. So it's like 1 kilometer or with some elevation data, and it's fine. We're happy with that. So regional scale maps, and moving towards more local scale, high resolution maps, as I have seen in the GeoPlantNet portal, it's great, and also it opened the door for monitoring. So I think the next step would be not only to map for one particular epoch, but to be able to monitor it over the years, in particular to monitor the impact.
And the way I use or we use in the team SDMs is it's threefold. The first one is something close to what Laura already mentioned, like you do some kind of gap analysis where you have protected areas, you have a map of a species or several species, and you try to tell whether the protected areas are actually doing their job, and the species are within the protected areas. So that's the first use. The second one is it's mainly about something that Christophe, you mentioned, connectivity analysis. We try to determine what factors, what habitat characteristics are impeding the movements of animals, and so we use the basis of this kind of analysis. It's a map of the range, the species range. So that's another use. Something we've addressed during the day is the forecasting, like trying to predict the distribution of species in the future. So that's another use of SDMs. And yeah, that's mainly the use we. And also, yeah, the other thing is it's also a very useful tool to try to decide where to put efforts to monitor species, where you have a map of the species that says, okay, with high probability the species is going to be there. You can try and maybe devote some efforts on the sampling, on the monitoring of the species. So we haven't used deep SDMs yet. So we're doing some kind of something that you mentioned, Laura, and we're kind of all doing, try to do we do the deep thing first, and then we plug the results of the deep, the outputs of the deep learning procedure in the ecological models, and that's something we. Now, maybe we'll get back to that, but this idea of propagating uncertainty, so that's something Célian in the room is working on during his PhD. How do we take the uncertainties we get from the outputs of the deep learning algorithms and propagate this uncertainty in ecological models, SDMs being, among others, ecological models. And probably that deep SDM is one solution for that, trying to do the two things at the same time.
Okay, maybe. But I gather from these elements that there are some needs that could fit with some potentialities of deep SDM, like the potentiality to better predict rare species, to scale at a larger taxonomic scope. Not only like one biological group, but others, accounting for their interaction. But also maybe some other aspects that are needed, which maybe we should discuss whether the deep SDM are the right tool for that, like uncertainty quantification. If we are to know in a certain place what are where do we need to gather more data, where do we not have knowledge. To switch to the next question, actually it's about how do you evaluate the usefulness of SDMs in your context? And so it echoes with what has said Damaris earlier. We should maybe not only focus on developing SDMs for predictive power of the community at a very high resolution, but maybe there are other aspects like interpretability of why a model predicts something, or transferability across a spatial context or temporal context, and also the topic of uncertainty of the prediction itself maybe should be accounted for in final decision workflows. So you have input about this?
We change the order, or?
As you want.
Who wants?
First to react. First served.
Let's shuffle. Are we supposed also to transfer to this one?
You can. Don't feel censored, Alexis.
Yeah, so maybe I can take GeoPlantNet as an illustration, and maybe also for the first question, if I act as a representative of citizens using PlantNet, maybe. But yeah, so to say that there might be benefits, but also potential risks of tools like GeoPlantNet. So of course, it's great to know that some protected species is at a given place, because it gives power to like citizens in small cities to say in the committees that okay, we should not build the new school here. Here you can look, there are some important species there. And we also see that in projects we're discussing with decision makers that, it can bring a lot in impact studies, or at least in preliminary steps of impact studies, so to know where you should go and to very check if there are some protected species. So, for instance, but of course, if you have a very high precision, very high resolution model like a digital twin of biodiversity, there is also a lot of risks that everybody know where each species is, and so can collect it, can have also negative impacts on it. So I was surprised no of the practitioner have this in mind, but this is also something we are thinking about. So yeah, I mean, any feedback on that is welcome. Should we blur some of the species and only protected species, or also maybe species like Arnica, for instance, there is a huge human pressure on them, and so yeah, that's questions. And so yeah, and also yeah, the link with uncertainty is that yeah, and of course, so far maybe those maps are not enough accurate to enable such risk. But yeah, this also has the question of the how accurate the maps are. So we are working on that. So, and probably for GeoPlantNet we will provide maps of uncertainty for the indicators, and for the species themselves. So we try to measure how well calibrated the model is, and this is ongoing work. But we hope the probability that we display on the maps will reflect as much as possible the uncertainty of the predictions. But this is a hard task, I mean, in any model, not only deep learning, but yeah, in deep learning it might be even more difficult than in, like for instance Bayesian model, which are more easy to deal with that. So, but there's still a lot of open issues on quantifying uncertainty, but there are also a lot of techniques to deal with uncertainty, to manage this uncertainty, to take decisions. So you are not obliged to quantize uncertainty. You can just use techniques like conformal predictions or things like that to give some intervals of confidence. And so depending on the decision you want to take in the end, you have solutions to take into account uncertainty.
Maybe briefly on that, I mean, of course, as we have seen in the talk today, for example, from Damaris, there is quite extensive literature in the classical species distribution modeling on how to validate, and there are established ways on which aspects should be considered when quantifying uncertainty. To me, one of the most delicate tasks is really when you're supposed to hand out maps of future distributions, because we don't have any immediate way of validating them, right? So oftentimes there is a consensus to try to quantify uncertainty, but what we found in our lab is if you really want to provide the maps, or if you have to, and you cannot just hide behind some integrated statistics that give you a general tendencies that species will move up, for example, you have to look at each map individually, because it's so risky, even for traditional SDM, that things are on these maps that are obviously not plausible. That I wouldn't be comfortable to only look at statistics.
Okay, so so that would be a more expert-based examination of the outcomes of SDMs in general that is needed to replace the fecal uncertainty quantification that we can produce with.
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, I mean, this task is inherently linked to extrapolation in many cases, right? But it's just, sure, there's a big interest in many stakeholders to get there. And when we get into these regimes, then the assumptions are broken for many of the tests that we can do formally. So yeah, a simple check usually tells a lot already when you just visually look at the patterns in a map.
Well, just follow up on this. Accuracy for sure also would be a main challenge using this tool. In particular, regarding the spatial planning application, we want good maps, and we also worked on expert validation kind of thing, or posterior validation of those maps to make sure that knowledge also on the maps reflect the knowledge to criticize the outputs. And the other also need for accuracy would be in the coming future, if we come up, we will talk about biodiversity credit or certificate, and want to set up a credible framework on that would be the main issue. The second, we talk about transfer. You mentioned transfer of the model. I would also raise the point of transferring the tool. We work on those countries. We not only want us as a researcher or expert to produce the map, but we want to work with the university, local university, research team, or even public institution that would be able to use it. So I heard a lot of presentation talking about computational cost or time processing. I don't know with how heavy is the deep SDM, but that would be also an issue to think of transferring also the tool and the skills.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a very good transition to my next point.
Yeah.
Please, Laura.
Just to add on one last thing is interpretability, which is important to me, and I was happy to see in Florian's presentation the species environment response curves, because this is very important to interpret the models and also to make them interpretable by the managers. They want to see that, if the relationship makes sense or not.
Historically, many SDMs were a bit constrained to respect some niche theory about the response curve, but it seems to me like this kind of regularization has been lost over the past years with the arrival of machine learning-based SDMs. So I was going to, a naive thought would be to say that deep learning methods are quite bad at extrapolating, but actually I'm not sure other machine learning-based SDMs are that good either. So it's interesting to have other ways of checking than a few accuracy metrics. And so if there's no other point regarding this question, I wanted... Yep. David, you wanted to state?
Just to last point, because like Olivier and Laura, we are investigating SDM for large animals with large home range. And since decades, we have only computed very local variables, which may have little meaning for animals. So it's better to integrate a seascape or a landscape approach, and deep SDM are great for that, providing the ability to manipulate rasters instead of local variables, which make a huge difference.
That's a good point. But then a question that is tied to what you were mentioning, Clovis, is then if you were to envision to use deep SDMs in your context, or if you already do, what are the technical barriers that prevent you from doing so? And also, like given the specificity of your context, like the data quality, scarcity, the sampling biases, does these problems make even more difficult to use deep SDMs? Because it's already a quite complex methodology. Also, do the skills, the money invested in the GPUs, the compute time is a barrier for using this?
Short answer. For the barriers, scarcity of the data, but really field data. I would say, so it's like a data collection on the field or getting good data. Sometimes we use GBF as well, so we have some data cleaning and also some gap on those areas where we're working. We don't, unfortunately, not too many PlantNet users on those areas. So scarcity and but on the processing or workflow, I think getting the environmental or of satellite data, it's not a big barrier, I would say. We have the platforms now that can handle that very quickly, I think. And so I have no idea what time is required to run the process. From our experience with a traditional SDM is not that long, but it's then finding maybe a person to run it, but internally we are able to use it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one barrier that I can think of is the language. So in ecology, we can see Python gaining some traction, but we're not there yet. So it's really R that we're using in the community. So I was very pleased to see your package, Florian. I mean, using Torch, the R PyTorch. I think it's very neat and it's very promising. So that's one thing. I think it could be a barrier, but I guess Saito. You say Saito or Sito? Saito? Both. I think it's a very promising tool to kind of disseminate this deep SDM idea and also I guess the pipeline from the collection of data, the 4 steps you described. I liked it a lot. Like, okay, you have to collect the data, do some analysis on images if you're dealing with images, and then do the SDMs, and then the question you have in mind, the ecological question, whether it's a prioritization or whatever. I think it's having the whole pipeline, not only the model, but that would be a very huge step towards dissemination of these tools and concepts.
Make me think about language in a broader sense as well, because sometimes it seems to me that it's difficult, given your background, to understand another community. Like people from the deep learning community use some terms like inference that doesn't have the same meaning as in statistics, which is more the language of ecology. And sometimes it's more difficult to access even articles from.
Right. Can I go back to the challenge of studying rare species? I've been studying these rare megafauna species for several years, and we have little data for these species, and our philosophy about it is that let's keep the model simple, because we have little data, we want parsimonious model, we don't want to overfit. But now I'm starting to hear that deep learning SDMs that are complicated methods can also be useful. So just opening the debate here. So for these rare species, should we keep with the simple models, or do we have promise with the more complex models from deep learning?
Do we have reactions on my side? The other.
Yeah. If we talk about limitations, I think in marine science, in my case, not like Laura, we have no excuse because data are there, computer facilities are never been like this before. We have nice collaborators like Alexis, Davis. My main limitation is human resources because we are all chasing the same good, skilled young people, and we do not enough staff members. So it's very hard to get good PhD students or postdocs or engineers on these topics. So. In ecology, the main limitation, I think Alexis has the same limit as well. It's hard to get motivated and hard-skilled young researchers sometimes.
So another question is, as researchers, should we do the deep SDMs ourselves, or should we rely on skilled students? So for me, I think it's most the later point.
Yeah, I agree that the term's complexity of the model is related to that. I mean, somehow, so either you have a tool that is just, you push a button and you have your deep SDM train. And we are not there, I think, so we have cycles, but I guess it's like, in our case, you first train a first model, it doesn't converge, and then you have issues. So I don't know if you display the loss, for instance, the loss of training and things like that, but yeah, when you train a deep learning model, it's never like just pushing a button. So it's also a little bit true with linear models, but like people use Maxent just by pushing a button, and maybe it's a bad idea also when they do it. But yeah, maybe we are still at the point where it's more complex, but it becomes more and more easy. And it depends on the complexity of the deep learning model. I mean, usually it's not the problem of the model, it's the problem of the input data. I mean, managing remote sensing images yeah, it's hard. And yeah, you need an engineer full-time during 3 years to build something like GeoPlantet. I mean, that's why, I mean, if we want to go to such methods, we have to mutualize efforts, and so yeah, that's why we are discussing with the National Geographic Institute in France. I mean, if we go to such digital twins, because it's the word they use at the National Geographic Institute, I mean, we have to mutualize as much as possible the efforts, and even at the European level, I think, because yeah, it's not something we want each small entity to run its own deep learning model, I think.
Thank you. Now, if we look toward the future from end-user perspective, and given what you have seen today in the presentation of where we are with deep SDMs, are there directions you would like deep SDMs to evolve towards? Things you feel that are missing given your research context and questions? So I cite just a few examples, like better integration with ecological theory, how we link the predictions, which are gray box prediction, to actual niche, so environmental filtering, dispersal limits, biotic interactions. Is it a better handling of the data quality and the data heterogeneity? Or could it be more mechanistic understanding, temporal, better accounting for temporal dimension in the data?
I give a short answer. So maybe plugging in directly these deep SDMs to my workflow, which is using deep learning models for automating species detection. So having it all at once, I'm not sure it's possible. But for me, since I also use images to detect species, would I be able with these deep SDMs to also use the landscape on these images to plug in SDMs? That's one of the questions I have.
For me, the next step is clearly to go beyond presence, absence, or abundance, is to go on the population structure, because for animals, body size is almost everything. It drives reproduction capacity, ecosystem functioning. So the goal will be not only to predict abundance of a given species, but the number of individuals in each size class. So the goal will be to complicate a bit the Y matrix by trying to predict population structure.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, it's accounting for traits a bit when we predict communities?
Yeah, or inside a given species, trying to predict each cohort or each size class. So much more complicated Y matrix.
On the end-user point of view, for the future, I would say, not too much in Python, but ideally would be a R package or something easy to handle. It already exists, perfect. So that would be nice. I think we have interest also in interpretation of the models to make sense, but I feel that with neural networks or deep SDM, it's going to be tough, and so many variables to use it to understand process or biology pattern and stuff. So we accept that we look for the maps, the outputs, and so and we're working on the input data, but ideally some kind of easy to process package would be excellent.
Yeah, if I understood correctly, the presentation from Florian, the theme of interpreting the effect of spatiotemporal inputs is not solved already when it comes to deep learning models. So probably room for research here. Thanks for your answers. So now we'll switch to the second part of the discussion, which will be animated by Diego.
Hello. So actually now we have like questions more focused on the people on the site. Because so we've heard a bit about the needs of people that are closer to being a practitioner, and now in a way the first question is what mostly for Philipp and Alex in terms of model development, what are you excited about in terms of model, like what do you want to do next, what do you think is missing?
You give the funding?
Ideally,
Give them money.
given in principle, right? But
A limited funding.
So I can start. So one project we are picking up in our group is inspired by work from Daniele Silvestro. It's about a modern way of doing conservation optimization. I think it's a brilliant idea because what happens is you have your biodiversity data, but then you don't just do a static optimization that tells you which is the best place to make your efforts, but you simulate a government for a certain amount of time. Climate change happens to your biodiversity layers, and the government has to decide where to protect at which order, and there is a cost layer that guides this. So it really picks or puts the whole problem into a dynamic setting, and is much more realistic in that sense. And I mean, to start with, one can use classical SDMs, but an option would be then to also have some, a reciprocal effect. If the agent does something, then maybe your biodiversity layer, which could be handled by a DNN that receives altered input, could react to it, right? So I think that's one direction that would allow a solution in a unified modeling framework with big models that have a broad overview over biodiversity that is done at the moment with many small maps of generated by different models and treated as a static problem, even though in reality it's much more dynamic. So I think that's a very interesting direction. Another one is the spatio-temporal context. I mean, we have heard it about with the term digital twin that is used in that sense sometimes. There are different ways of doing this, right? You can either be explicit about quantifying spatio-temporal relationships, which is part of Christophe's work, or Victor is doing this as well, or you can just resolve your environmental predictors fully temporally. I think this, since we have Sentinel data, I think we can do that in a meaningful way. We have climate time series, we have remote sensing time series. We have had an exponential growth in observational data in many regions of the world. I mean, this is certainly not something that is going to be possible everywhere because it's very data hungry. But I think for some regions this becomes realistic and allows then also to try and recognize trends in biodiversity early on, which is important for mitigation strategies. So that's maybe a second avenue I see, and then maybe a third one is this combination of constraints, physical constraints, biological constraints in the deep network settings. I mean, this is really something where I'm not an expert at, but I see that given this modular setup, you have much more flexibility to try and bring together this empirical side with some mechanistic constraints. Also here, I think, in many cases, this will be data hungry, and maybe it's not going to be possible to do everything in a very detailed fashion. But given that we have a world with massively growing biodiversity data, I would assume that ideas like this become more and more feasible.
And yeah, maybe a first topic that is exciting me currently is long distance and long-term dependency. So I mean, long-term dependency, I talked about it a little bit, but yes, something that happened 50 years ago could have an impact right now. but it's also true for long distance dependency. So because of geographical barriers, or I don't know, something happened very far and then it has an impact, like the butterfly effect. And transformer model are more and more able to capture such long distance dependency. So you see that in ChatGPT. The beginning of your whole document is used to infer something very far away because they use more and more high-dimensional attention matrix. And so I was just imagining like an unlimited transformer model, what will I do with it? Okay, so instead of extracting patches, so I have the whole world, so I have a single raster, and I have some labels somewhere, all right? So I can compute my attention matrix, and so forward it, and backward it, but I have only one. Because I have only one Earth realization. And so, this comes to this limit they know in physics that, we have only one realization of Earth. And so, this was making my brain quite a little bit crazy. But, now we also have a lot of temporal samples. So maybe what happened 15 years ago is useful to know. And so, and maybe you could have compromised, like, not having this single image, but something else. But this is some more limitation to what we could do, even if we had such a magic model. We have only one realization. So, and maybe another topic which was maybe mentioned by Laura is to like have more convergence between identification and SDMs, and so all the different pieces that are used in different models right now. Because species identification can be improved by SDM. SDM can also went the other way. But so probably having models that are multi-scale. So you can provide both in situ images or remote sensing images or landscape images, or all together if you have them at the right place. Probably it can improve a lot. And if you go further, I guess also there will be a convergence between different disciplines in Earth observation, because we'll have such foundation models and things like that will like make things converging. And that you could use then to solve your real task. But maybe it will be simple because you will just take this model trained by others and you will just extract features from it, and ideally that's what you would like. So two topics.
All right. So we've heard something like agentic AI and basically like near real-time monitoring and digital twins, and like massive models with massive amount of data, but also multimodal approaches and multitask. And then the question is like, so out of these topics that you find interesting, how well do you think those are aligned with the needs that we have just heard from people on that side of the table? And also for people on that side of the table, like, do you feel that there is an alignment in some of those, or maybe like some more alignment needs to be sought?
I maybe come back to these future conditions that were mentioned briefly. I have mentioned them before as well. I think, this is a lasting challenge, and myself, I'm not entirely certain how dominant deep SDMs will become in this topic. I see different issues, like on the negative side. When I talk about our lab, for a while we really tried to do these predictions at 25 meters using the full power of current data. Now we realized actually that's risky, so we go back. We have 1 kilometer pixels. We have just climate data to really only have climatic niches, which is much less risky. So in that sense, it's much less of a big data problem. But then again, what we also use in our group is a biome model to forecast that considers physiology, considers the increase in CO2 that we expect, and that actually has a huge impact, right? More CO2 in the atmosphere enables trees to cope better with water stress. So if you use such models that have these physiological aspects included, they give much more optimistic future in terms of forest cover, which is much more pessimistic when you use an SDM approach that is ignorant of this, then the topic continues because you will have nitrogen limitations if you have a lot of CO2, and then some models account for this, others don't. I think some of these constraints might be built into deep SDMs that try to model future conditions, so in that sense it's an advantage. And another issue that comes a bit out of the work that I presented, for some plants, especially if we have annuals that are short-lived, they might also be able to cope with climate change, but just advancing their growing period rather than having to escape. And I think at the moment the discussion is a lot about range change, so everything is assumed to be static, but having such a temporal response on top of it probably also again changes the picture quite a bit. And I think also in this context deep SDMs would have an advantage. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what will be proposed on this topic in the future.
Right. David, maybe you want to add something before you leave, or you're fine? No? Okay, from Clovis and Laura, maybe like, do you see yourselves reflected by what you're hearing, and of course also Olivier?
No, but last comment is very important, I think, because as we see, we are very interested in the climate change impact. So modeling change in ecological and climatic niche. So understanding or having some process to account for adaptability or well, expert knowledge for sure, but within the deep SDM would be very nice.
And I share Alexis' views to integrate all types of deep learning models, those models for species detection, identifications, and distribution modeling as well. And ultimately, this may also reduce time and energy costs if we are able to all combine them and run them at the same time, rather than running them into steps, perhaps.
All right. So basically, what I hear is from that side, there is more interest on like the ability of encoding ecological knowledge and be able to integrate different types of data into the models, rather than in huge models that account for the whole of Earth, right? That's, okay, and maybe just one last question, and then we can close the discussion ahead of time. So what do you think that deep SDMs with their current capabilities can already provide with respect to traditional SDMs? This is also for Alexis and Philipp.
Yeah, I will say maybe current capabilities and maybe capabilities in 10 years, let's say. But yeah, because we are often saying that it's either predictive power or interpretability, and so my initial thought when we discussed about that even 5 years ago was that, so imagine you have the perfect oracle. So you have a model that is a black box, but that predicts exactly the reality. So I mean, that's just the dream for any ecologist. You don't need to go on the field and observe data because you have an oracle that says, okay, this species is there, you want to know, just. And so that was a little bit the idea of having a highly predictive model. So if your model is highly predictive and biased, it's a real digital twin. So then you can apply your own model that is highly interpretable on the outputs of this highly predictive model. And so that was somehow the initial argument. So of course it's wrong. It doesn't work this way right now. But yeah, I think it was just saying that predictive power can be useful for, I mean, if you are able to model what happens, somehow you have something in your model that you can use. So they do that for simulation, for instance. Rather than running a lot of simulations, they have deep learning model that simulates the results of the simulations. And so this is, saving a lot of energy for many domains. And so, I think we should also think about deep SDMs this way.
I think it's something that really makes things different is that here we have big models that model a system of thousands of species and that allow the study of its response to different disturbances or maybe interactions between different trophic levels. I think this movement from having very many algorithms that generate the map and then putting them together, it's very static, and you're quite limited, and the deep learning framework on the one side offers you to have somehow an interdependency in there that you can use to explore relationships, and at the same time you have this high flexibility in defining your questions, into designing your models according to a specific problem that I think are completely underexplored today. I mean, of course, it depends where you are. I think when I talk about this, I'm always thinking about systems with lots of data. So I don't see it as easy in places where we have little observations, because fundamentally little information is just much more limiting the possibilities to make interpretation about anything, right? But for the big data systems, I think, also in terms of seasonal variations, in terms of, all these bigger perspective, systematic relationships, there is still a lot to be extracted. And, maybe you cannot do, that's maybe something also I'm not very clear about, but when we talk, for example, about response curves in a GAM, you have each predictor independently and you get a curve and it's easy and you can interpret it. But then when you have all these weights that interact, I think the response will then always be context dependent, and it's not so easy to have one answer for everything. But still you can, design your questions and query the model and get an answer. So it's about finding the right questions and then doing experiments based on model outputs. In some sense, the whole thing is maybe moving also a bit in a similar way as weather modeling, where you have big models that are very capable, and then you have groups that use some time or make requests to it for a certain experiment. So that also, I think, is something that we are getting more and more to.
But in that sense, like all of the case studies that we saw, they are all like data poor. Right, so maybe specifically for those cases that seem to be at least the ones that are of interest of the members in the panel on that side. Do you have like some specific aspects in which deep SDMs could help them?
Monitoring, more efficiently monitoring. I think that's a good idea, and maybe that's deep learning a bit more generally. But what I've seen from the X Prize, for example, is this possibility to take lots of images and have them sorted in an efficient way that then speeds up the labeling. Things like this, I think, are advances that will improve productivity a lot, but it's maybe not strictly bound to deep SDM in that context.
All right, thanks a lot. So with this, like the questions are over. So like, I don't know if someone in the panel wants to say something, Olivier?
Yeah, just a quick comment about something we discussed at the break. It was nice to see today that we have a community with ecologists, computer scientists, also statisticians together, because something we've seen probably in the last decade is like, and something you mentioned, Laura, is like the deep learning community has kind of developed tools and in parallel to the needs of the ecologists, and it's nice that today we have the community. The three communities are together, and it's important to keep that momentum to have if the end use of deep SDM is really to address ecological questions. The ecologists have to be there and be associated to the research and to the questions, and it made me think about something we thought about, the trade-off between optimizing some CNN, like you want to have the best performance, but at the end of the day, if you had stopped like a month before you would have the same ecological answer to your question, because it's just at the end you want a map with the least uncertainty around this map, and that's something. And it's when you have the computer scientist, the statistician, and the ecologist together that you can really optimize this kind of trade-off. Yeah. I don't know if it makes sense. But,
Makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe someone in the audience has something to add, since we are a bit ahead of schedule. Yes.
Sorry for keeping. So maybe one dimension that we touched upon, but that for me is a big concern, and it maybe deserves a little bit further attention, is this difference between interpolation and extrapolation. And it's of course, so I think what's really clear is that the methods that we talked about, they have a big advantage for interpolation. So if I have a given data set like PlantNet and I'm predicting in this data set, I can check very well if the performance is good. And the deep SDMs, they have a more flexible input and they have a more flexible output, so I can use much more data, and the advantage is clear. A little bit the unclear question for me, whether deep SDMs really bring an advantage, is in many extrapolation tasks, and I think we didn't call them like this, but by this I mean, for example, of course, projection under climate change, where we wouldn't have the images available. But there's maybe also other extrapolation tasks, like what you mentioned, if you want to monitor biodiversity change, and so you're observing your satellite images, and from the satellite images, the deep SDM is saying the biodiversity locally changes. But you don't know if this is true, because it's deduced by the images that you observe, by the trained images. And I think just from other fields, we know that the CNNs have a kind of history of not extrapolating or not generalizing well to new situations. So usually the generalization error drops a lot. And so I think it's something that we can explore, but I feel we're really missing a little bit the validation studies that do this kind of work, because we always only see the validation error in sample. But not so much if we do this kind of extrapolation tests. And I don't know if people have done these kind of tests. Maybe there's some comments on it.
Thank you so much for the talk. Very interesting. It's only like not really a remark, but the only thing that I've seen so far is the Mayer and Pebesma research on area of applicability. So where you can predict, where you can basically verify which areas your model is going to be predicting well and where not. Has anybody maybe seen that one? Well, basically it allows you to see which areas specifically your model is still going to be functioning pretty well and the error margins are going to be still acceptable. And it's basically based on the index of the similarity, I think. So, yeah.
So just looking how far the test data are from the trained data.
Just see, so I've seen this data here, and if this is beyond the data that I've seen, the model is going to be like, no, I cannot predict here.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at least it allows you to know if it's not extrapolating well, I guess, but maybe doesn't really help you extrapolating, right?
It's not going to help you extrapolate, but at least you're going to know the areas where it can extrapolate. Well, it's going to not extrapolate well in areas which are not yet explored, I guess.
Thanks. I think one of the venues to explore is to use these physics-informed machine learning or deep learning. And in contrary to what you said, Philipp, I think actually these guys need less data because you constrain them with more knowledge. And by imposing these constraints, which we need to find, and we don't. I mean, it's really a research direction. Which constraints we are sure as ecologists should apply no matter what the world will turn into. These I think are really powerful and can make the models more interpretable, and it's something I haven't seen yet, and probably I believe it's a very good research direction, and it would be great to have your opinion if you have something on that.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, basic deep learning stuff are not good at extrapolation. I mean, because the class of function you can cover is huge. And so they are very good at interpolating, and that's what the double descent theory proves and all that stuff. So now about extrapolation, I mean, if you know your phenomenon is linear, of course you will use a linear model to extrapolate. I mean, that's clear. You have no need otherwise. But yeah, like the assumption of machine learning is that you don't know the class of function. That's the problem. But actually, when you know the physical phenomenon and that you know some constraints can be used, so like in these physics-informed models, then of course you have to do it, and you can start to do some extrapolation. Maybe forecasting is doable. I mean, if you have a time series, you are able, like to predict the next few steps because you hope some patterns are already in the past and you recognize those patterns, and then you can predict the next few steps. I would say forecasting, deep learning are good at that, but really for extrapolating in the long term, in 30 years, 50 years, you cannot just learn that from data. I mean, even in climatic models, so it's not mechanistic model that predicts during years and years and years and years. And I mean, you need hypothesis, you need knowledge about the physics if you want to well extrapolate. And even those, you don't know what will happen. I mean, if a meteorite falls on the Earth, you're dead. So like you can predict events and things like that. So I mean, extrapolation is a concept, but it recovers a lot of different things. And I think, and depending on those things, there are some good or wrong answers. But I mean, deep learning are not better than other models in extrapolating. I think they are very good in generalizing to other contexts. Actually, they are very good at that. So with lower data, they can interpolate better, and so they can, the spatial transferability is better, and the temporal transferability may be better for the next few steps. But for long-term extrapolation, I mean, it's only hypothesis and about the function, about the phenomenon for me.
Right, thanks. So, I mean, I think with this we can close the panel. Like I hear that maybe we should be working on physics ecology informed models with multitasking into account. So let's thank the panel.